Yo, what's up guys? This is Coach Jovan back at it again with another episode of Weightroom Overtime. As you guys may know already, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like, give a comment. These are very controversial. I love to get basically you guys' ideas and what you guys been taught and what you guys think of the topics really, and then give me some new ideas that maybe you guys may have some questions about or want to know a little bit more about that situation or your situation. I'd love to make a video about it if I can. But for today's video, we have a pretty interesting one that I think if you have been around, I wouldn't say exercise, I guess you could say exercise, but more into sports. If you have been around sports for a long time, play sports for the majority of your, let's say, childhood and maybe early adulthood, this might be a pretty good topic, as you may know already, right? So warm-ups, right? What is the whole issue with warm-ups? Do you feel as an athlete, were they helpful for you, or depending on your sport, right? Because it might be different. Or do you think you weren't really aware of the situation of why you're warming up, why it's so important, or maybe why it's not important to warm up, right? Which leads me to the controversial topic around exercise science, really. And the question has been, should static stretching be used in a warm-up setting, right? So static stretching. What is static stretching? What is dynamic stretching, right? So for those who may not know what static stretching means or what it is essentially if when you're involving a muscle group, right, or a muscle that is not recruiting other muscles or other joints to be able to produce that stretch. So for example, if you bring your arm across your chest, right, this is going to be a static stretch because again, you're not using momentum, you're not using your legs, you're not using your torso, your core to make the stretch happen. So that's kind of what it is when you're isolating one muscle group essentially into a stretching form or extension of that muscle. What is a dynamic stretch, right? Dynamic stretch is now the opposite of that, where you are maybe lunging, for example, right? Maybe you are squatting, hold squat, split squat. Now you're maybe doing open the gates, for example, right? So those are going to be dynamic stretching. So now you understand what static stretching is, kind of isolated standing, and usually or sitting down, reaching for your toes. That's going to be a static stretch, rather than a dynamic stretch where you're going to have a little bit of running, maybe 10 yards. You're doing some open arms and stuff like that. So that's the difference between today. The controversial topic is should you apply these before a game, or should you have hold static stretch before a game? I know that's been in the world of soccer that I come from. Ideally, you would have us warm up and then you would do static stretching. But is it really benefiting us, was a question that I think I got out of this, and wanted to kind of educate you guys a little bit into maybe what I feel would be ideal. But again, this is different for every sport, right? We can have a team of baseball players, and it's going to be different than a soccer player, for example, right? Depending on the movements of the sport. So when we look at warm-ups, right, there's this key factor that most trainers or strength and conditioning professionals should abide by, and that is going to be a ramp, right? So what is a ramp? We use this phrase ideally just to remember how the components of a correct warm-up should be, depending on the sport again. So raise is going to be for the arm, right? Activate and mobilize, and then we have potentiate at the very end, right? So what we're doing is essentially the reason for a warm-up, it's really to elevate your heart rate, to elevate your core temperature, your body temperature, and maybe a joint, for example, as well, right? Depending if you need that joint to run faster or whatever it may be. And again, we're preparing your athletes physically and mentally, and this could be if you're not in a sport as well, right? So for example, for those gym lovers or people that love exercise, do you guys also do a warm-up before let's say you start squatting, or you start deadlifting, clean and jerk, power clean? Do you guys do your own little routine of a warm-up? Or leave me in the comments, let me know what you guys usually do before you step into a barbell or step into a bench. Let me know a little bit about your routine of what you guys do to prepare yourself mentally maybe or physically before you go up there and put 225 on or whatever it may be, right? There has to be a way that you have done this, right? Unless you've learned from your experiences, because the reason we like to also introduce a warm-up is really to delay that risk of injury if we can, and hopefully not have your athletes get injured, in the first 10 minutes of a game, for example, right? So we don't want none of that. I don't think you want to experience that in the gym either. If you tear your shoulder girdle, or if you tear your bicep, if you tear your chest for going 225 right at the bat and not warming up, there's going to be some consequences, right? That when you get older, it gets worse. So that was the topic for today. Let me know in the comments what you guys think in regards to, should you warm up, hold stretches, or should you, incorporate more of like, I'm going to run 10 yards by doing bounds, or am I doing skips, anything like that, before you begin a movement. Like, let's say you go running, or let's say you're going to do, a CrossFit workout. Let me know a little bit about what you guys do, what you guys think, and what you guys been told, and the reason you guys think you should or shouldn't do it that way, right? So that's the big, topic, should you or should you not. But I also wanted to see what you guys think as far as, the sport that you play. So for example, if I have a group of, let's say, 10-year-old baseball players, right? That is a sport that is predominantly played in, I would say, all directions. So you're multi-joint and, in all planes of motion, really. So you're going sideways, you're going forward, you're going backwards, up and down, right? So, when you start looking at it that way, compared to what you're going to be doing maybe, or the sport that you play and all the movements that are incorporated in there, that's the way you kind of want to program or plan your warm-up as well. So you may want to start with just elevating your heart rate, which could be, as you guys may see already with a lot of baseball players or a lot of sports, you have, your players, have a quick small jog around the field, or very light, 10, 20 yard shuttle or whatever. That is, again, to prepare the body a little bit before we start, doing the dynamic exercises, right? So then that leads me to the next thing, right? So after you have kind of figured out or plan ahead, like what you're going to exercise, or, what sport you're playing. And here, for example, we're doing baseball. So we're going to have the athletes warm up a little bit around the field. After that should take about 5 minutes or so. After that, we're going to incorporate about 10 minutes of a dynamic warm up. And that includes everything from, let's say, skips, bounding. What do we have as well? Open gates, closed gates. We have side steps, stuff like that. After we do shuttles of those for about 10 minutes, then we're going to incorporate, dynamic stretches and static stretches after that as well. So arm circles, gaiters, above the head, across the body, before we start even throwing the ball. So that's the key component, because when we look at baseball players, there's a lot of repetitive motion, especially when you start young. For all the baseball players out there, you know what I'm talking about, where you start throwing at a very young age, and then by the 16, 17-year-olds, or even high school, you start noticing a lot of pain in regard to your joints, maybe your elbow, maybe your shoulder, etc., right? That is maybe from the lack of prepping your body beforehand and in your earlier years, that you didn't necessarily know what you were doing. And that is my whole goal today, is as a parent, if you're a parent, if you're a brother, cousin, or yourself, if you're watching this, there's a reason it's called exercise science. Yes, the exercise is part of, what we do in regards to the sport that you may be looking at or play. Like, that's one whole component, but there's also a science behind it, of the reason why we like to incorporate certain things, whether that's a strength training program, whether that's plyometrics, whether that's, diet could be a major role as well. There's a reason all this is behind, because we have, again, through studies, figured out a certain direction where it should be going. And yes, you're going to have one-offs, because a lot of them are studies, but when you start seeing a trend of all kind of coming out the same outcomes, there's a reason for that, right? We want to have, your athletes play a longer time, then, hey, I just want this guy to, I know he has a little bit of a, tennis elbow, or he has a, he's a pitcher and he throws a lot and his shoulder hurts a little bit, but we really want to finish the season strong. That's kind of where you ask your question, whether it's kind of risky or not, to be able to keep pushing that athlete without having the proper warm up, proper, cool down. Could be another conversation, right? How do you, go from high intensity, intervals to, hey, I'm done playing. How do I prepare my body for maybe a next game if you have a tournament, or tomorrow if you have another game tomorrow, right? What goes into that physically and mentally could be a huge component to your athletes. But again, I would say first start with, so again, we're gonna kind of prepare a little bit in your minds how to do a proper warm-up, not necessarily, you know, form and stuff like that, but what you should apply before. So first thing you want to do is kind of identify what, you know, major movements are you going to be doing, whether that's in the gym, whether that's in the sport. For example, basketball, you're jumping up and down a lot, you know, passing, cutting, you get it, right? So kind of figure out what movements are going to be primarily done within the sport or activity, and then you go from there. You start, you know, well, I'm going to start, you know, kind of warming up my body and my core temperature and my body temperature, prepare myself mentally to what's going to go next, which is going to be your dynamic stretches. And that is where, you know, you may want to do 10 yards, and then you start doing, you know, your own little pace of high knees, you know, karaoke, etc., right? And then from there you do dynamic stretches. That is where you go from that to doing like jump rope. If you had jump rope, you can do arm circles forward, gaiters, those kind of movements. And then from there, you go to your static stretchings, usually after the game. And that's kind of the question where it comes, should you do it before or after, right? My idea would be, if you're gonna do static stretches, that's where you hold the stretch. I wouldn't, the research, a lot of it is very controversial. They're saying you should do it, you shouldn't. Depends on the outcomes in the sport again. But they say if you hold it for more than 60 seconds, so let's say you're doing, you know, your hamstring stretch. Ideally, you don't want to hold it more than 60 seconds because then it starts interfering with the muscle a little bit in the way that it recovers, right? Because we all have thin filaments and the way where your muscles contract and extend. Anyway, that's a different topic. But they say if you're going to do it, you usually want to do it 30 seconds or 20 seconds or less, and then go on to the next stretch, because again, you're preparing to compete, right? You're preparing to put your body through a workout or whatever it may be. But that is the question, guys. Hopefully you guys like this topic. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, if you guys should stretch before or after, what you guys currently do and how you feel. I'd love to know a little bit. Again, I use a lot of data and do a lot of research today, where I like to put that into you know, my work and articles and stuff like that. So give me a thumbs up, guys. We have more coming. Just let me know what you guys want to hear. I'd love to get more of a feedback from you guys. But here we are again. Stay safe, take care, comment, subscribe, and share with the coach or anybody that you may have, and let me know what they think. Thanks, guys.